We're continuing our partnership with Learn Liberty this week, and joining me is an author of 17 books, a former professor of economics, history, English, and communications at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and a historian and economist in her own right. Deirdre McCloskey, welcome to the Rubin Report.
Well, thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
That is quite a bio for you. It took me a while, because there was a lot that I had to leave out, but there's only so many words I can say in a sentence.
Well, I'm very old, so I've had a very complicated life. So I'm also an adjunct professor of classics and philosophy, or was, and I've taught philosophy for money in Holland, and I feel that you can't be a real economist, which is what my original training was, without at least reading books in the other fields, to kind of put the rationality of humans in some sort of context so you include the other things they do.
Yeah, all right. So before we get going here, I thought the best way to start would be to read a quote from you. I've never done this before in the year plus that I've been doing this show, but I thought this was so perfect and it sort of captures everything about you, and I think you know what I'm going to read already, but I want to get this right. Quote, "I'm a literary, quantitative, postmodern, free market, progressive, Episcopalian, Midwestern woman from Boston who was once a man, not conservative. I'm a Christian libertarian."
That's me, dear. That's me, all the way.
I mean, you've given me everything here. I don't even know where to go from here. Okay, so where should we go from here? All right, well, let's start, because I don't think we have to spend a tremendous amount of time on it unless you want to, but let's just start with the trans stuff.
Well, sure. And I was born Donald, which, by the way, in Irish means world ruler. So you can apply this to our president, our new president.
Lordy. We'll get to him in a little bit.
We'll get to him in a while. And then from age 11 on, I'd wanted to be a woman. But I was born in 1942, so I'm very aged. And in 1953, there was nothing to be done about it. So I said, okay, I got to be a guy. So you're looking at the captain of her high school football team. Wow. Admittedly, a very small school. And I was an athlete in college, and was married for 30 years to the love of my life, and have a couple of grown children and 3 grandchildren. So I had a full male life up to age 53, and then my joke is, did I want to be an old man or an old woman? I thought, oh, well, let's be an old woman. And it's not as trivial. You know, this isn't about cost and benefit. It's not a career move to become a female professor. That doesn't improve your...
Yeah, the idea that you even frame that within an economic model is sort of amazing.
I did. At one point I did it, about 2 months or so before I realized that I could do it and should do it, which was August of 1995. I actually did a cost-benefit study of changing gender.
Wow.
I mean, this is insane. This is not how you make decisions.
Yeah, so what did you do? I mean, you sat down with 2 columns?
I sat down and had 2 columns. It was completely ridiculous. And then in the middle of August in 95, as the English say, they've got a nice expression, I twigged to it. I got it, that I could do it and should do it. And I was not a sad sack before. I was not going to commit suicide or something, but I'm happier. Unfortunately, my marriage family turned against me. My former wife, of 30 years, and my children haven't spoken to me since those days.
Wow. Did your wife know when you first got married or throughout the marriage?
Yeah, throughout the marriage, she knew what I knew, which was that I was a heterosexual cross-dresser. Yeah, every once in a while, not very often, I would dress in women's clothes, not in her presence. And it wasn't a big deal. It's like, foot fetish or something. See, guys, as women learn, have a lot of little weirdnesses that they go in for. Yeah. And it doesn't really amount to anything often. And that's how I viewed it for decades. I was terribly ashamed when I was younger, and then finally, my 40s or something, I said, oh, well, okay, so what? So we went along perfectly well, and then that last year, 1995, I finally twigged, as I said.
So when you did it, at that age? I mean, people think of it now. You know, trans has become sort of hot now. It's
Not
sort
in
of
1995.
it's
it
the
was
it.
not.
Right, it wasn't at that time. There was really sort of nobody to, you know, I'm sure you could find somebody academically to look at.
Not too many.
If you did some research, you could find somebody, but
Very few.
but very few in terms of, you know, culturally and on television, all that kind of stuff. So when you decided to do it, I mean, what was the reaction after? You had a career, you were a professional,
It was
et cetera,
kind
et
of
cetera.
it was kind of funny because the economists tended to, you know, they're all economists, even if they're not free market economists, tend to think that choice is desirable and there's no controversy about it. So they would say, oh, well, it's okay if she wants to do it. I mean, whereas my historian...
So that would be the libertarian
that's
view
the kind of
it,
libertarian
sort of.
view, but most economists, even if they weren't libertarians, seem to have this attitude. And then my historian colleagues and my colleagues in anthropology and so on, it was less easy for them to
Really?
do, because they think in terms of identities. And they think, and we once you have an identity, you're supposed to keep it. If you're Chicana, you're Chicana, period.
Right.
And I think that was their problem, but it wasn't, you know, I didn't, very few people turned away from me, and the women especially, of all descriptions, were wonderful.
Yeah.
In my book called Crossing, a memoir published in 1999, I have a opening section where I thank all the women who helped me a bit, you know, in sending a nice letter or inviting me for lunch and so on. And it was 240 names in the 3 years of my transition.
What's the part of being trans that people don't think about? Is there
Well,
a piece
what they
that...
don't get is it's not true, the kind of journalistic phrase of a woman trapped in a man's body, or vice versa. It turns out they're about equal numbers on the other side, going the other way. So they think it's this terrible conflict, whereas, you know, people adjust. People adjusted to extermination camps. Mm-hmm. They can adjust to almost anything, and I don't mean to compare being a guy to being in an extermination camp, but they can adjust. And then the other thing they need to know is that it's a minority interest. It's more common than we once thought, but it's not going to change the gender ratios in the system. It costs about as much as a new car, kind of a moderate new car, not a Mercedes. And when I see new cars on the street, I say, oh, why didn't those people change gender? He said, oh yeah, they don't want to. Most people are satisfied with their gender, even if they regard how men are treated or women are treated as makes them uneasy, and they worry about gender stereotypes. Nonetheless, they don't want to change.
Yeah. Did you have any regret after?
There's something that's really important for straight people to understand. No one has regret. The number of people who have a regret one way or the other, male to female, female to male, is minuscule. And B, if they have regret, they can change back. It's okay, well, gee, you can't grow a penis. Right. Well, so what? Many perfectly well-functioning men don't have penises from terrible accidents or war injuries. Big deal. Mm-hmm. It's how you present yourself. It's how you live in the world. That's what determines how society takes you on. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
So I'm curious, you mentioned the economists that you worked with and the historians and the sociologists. What about the psychologists?
Oh, the psychologists are fine. But
even back then, none of them were...
Not a problem. But the psychiatrists are really dangerous.
Yeah. Can you explain the difference for someone that doesn't know a difference between a psychologist?
Well, a psychiatrist is one with an MD.
Yeah.
He's a doctor. They're usually he, but some she's. Anyway, he's a doctor, then specializes in diseases of mental diseases. And thank God there are lots of things we can do about depression and a little bit about schizophrenia, and the drugs and so on have been developed, and I'm all for it. But the trouble is the psychiatrists now, the MDs, know nothing about transgender things yet they figure they're an expert. You know, the old joke is, what's the difference between God and an MD? God doesn't think he's an MD. So I was seized by my sister twice. She tried it 3 times for mental observation and confined in a madhouse twice.
Wow.
It cost me $8,000 in attorney's fees to get out of these places.
This is when you were transitioning,
This is
right
in
around
95,
that?
the end of 95. And the psychiatrists were just really creepy. It was the worst horror movie you can think of.
Well,
Here's my advice to anyone who gets seized for, I mean, the cops come, seized for observation, don't make any jokes. They have no sense of humor. You make a joke, they write it down.
They write it down. That wasn't funny.
It's really scary.
That's really, I never really thought of this before, but so for a psychiatrist, in a weird way, they would be the least qualified to deal with a trans person because their method is based in drugs, right?
It's based in drugs, and it's based in extreme pathologies. And thank God, I mean, I'm not against psychiatry as a profession. I think it's fine. Although, by the way, it's the source of homophobia. The 100 years of homophobia in Northern Europe was, I think, closely connected with the rise of psychiatry as a profession. But in any case, I'm not against them in general, but they deal with people who are really ill. And so they want to put you in some illness category. Instead of saying, oh, well, that's kind of weird. Oh, hey, how about them Hawks? And that's actually how the students at the University of Iowa, where I was teaching at the time, that's how they reacted. They had seen rock musicians with eye makeup and Boy George and so on. They didn't care. It didn't bother them.
You know, it's funny, I only went to a psychiatrist once because I wanted to get Xanax because I used to have anxiety related just to fly when I was on a plane, and that was it. That was the only reason I wanted it. The psychiatrist would not let me leave without telling me that I had time shift disorder, which sounds like an absurdly made up thing, and gave me a prescription for something else, which I proceeded to throw out when I walked out of the building. But that sort of idea of we can prescribe everything.
Here's the symbol of it. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM. It's been through 5 editions since, I think, the 1960s. That's going to name and tell you how to diagnose all the mental disorders. It starts in the 1960s being about that thick, about half an inch thick. By now it's about 3 inches thick, which implies that we've all become crazier since the 1960s.
Well, what is that? What does that say? Does that say that our modern lives have made us crazier, or that the pathology of finding things wrong with people?
It's the authoritarian mentality. It's the I'm from the government and I'm here to help you mentality. It's the nudge mentality. It's the socialist mentality. It's the conservative mentality. It's everything except true liberalism, which is if people are not doing something to hurt you, leave them alone. And so there's a deep libertarian argument here. The famous psychiatrist Thomas Schaas used my case in his last book as an instance of the overreaching of the profession of psychiatry. Look, you get put in a mental hospital, you may not ever get out because they're in charge. If you're put in jail for, armed robbery, you pretty much know your chances of getting out and so on, because it's on TV all the time, or at least in the movies. So you have some conception, from your friends, but you don't know with psychiatry. It's very scary. So I was very frightened by this episode. My sister was a psychologist, academic psychologist. And at the time, she was at the Harvard School of Public Health. So, you can be sure that when she wrote to the judges, she used the Harvard stationery.
Which I assume helped at some level, probably.
Oh boy, did it. She could say it, she told lies. Now she and I are very close, but it took a few years for me to get over it.
All right, so one more thing on trans, and then I want to move to actual issues. Not to diminish the trans issue, but I think we've established it.
Unfortunately, it's going to be at least the second sentence of my obituary. I'm trying to drive it down into, I don't know, the fourth sentence.
Yeah, well, look, you gave me a lot of good other buzzwords here, so we're going to get to those in just a sec. My last thought on it would be 2016. I mean, this was the year that trans really became mainstream. You know, from Caitlyn Jenner to Orange is the New Black, and just this feeling of there are trans actors now. There's a visibility.
Transparent?
Yeah, transparent. Of course.
Where the only sane person on the set is the transitioner.
Yeah, exactly. Right, really flipping everything on its head.
Yeah.
That must feel incredibly validating for you.
Well, it isn't so much validating. I mean, I had a lot of years to work on validation, but it's another freedom. Look, all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. A slave owner wrote that, yet it's been the kind of marker, laying down a marker for American politics, and we keep pushing it. First, we got rid of slavery eventually, and then we had votes for women. Then we had finally civil rights in the South. Then we had rights for, then we had feminism. Then we had gay rights. Then we had handicapped rights. And all the ones that happened during my lifetime, I had the correct opinions about. I was in favor of the civil rights movement. I was against Vietnam. I was in favor of gay rights. I was in favor of women's rights, blah, 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 blah. But I didn't do anything about it. I didn't burn my draft card. I was still Donald. I didn't I just said, oh, gee, that's good. Well, then God in 1995 tapped me on the shoulder, and she said, she's my Anglican God, she said, okay, dearie, now you can testify. If you don't do this, if you don't, allow yourself to be a public exponent for trans people, then you're just a jerk. And so I did. And so I've been giving talks. I'm not a professional gender crosser. Mm-hmm. I'm a scholar, I'm a teacher, I'm a writer. Yeah. But I think I should, a tenured professor should be the one who stands up, because she can't be fired.
Yeah. That's a little bit, it reminds me sort of when Jason Collins, the NBA basketball player, came out. He was really sort of at the end of his career, so it allowed him to do it in a way that where they knew the Nets could sign him, and then at the same time, he wasn't going to play much. It would sort of go under the radar, but something good would have come out of it.
Yeah, and
but you put even though you took risks, obviously, you put your butt on the line.
Well, I thought I was going to lose my job, but actually it turns out that the University of Iowa, where I was teaching at the time, was very progressive in these matters. Way more progressive than my alma mater, which is Harvard, in the 90s. Harvard, the Eastern privates took a long time to get on this particular train. But it didn't happen. But it shows in such a career-driven person as me, such a person who wants to publish books and so on, it shows how much I wanted it when I realized I could do it, that I was willing to lose my job.